if we're honest about what this means, if there is no God, then his mother's death didn't really mean anything. It was just one event in a series of events of a bunch of different chemical machines that bump into each other and one stopped functioning. I remember some years ago, a friend of mine from school, we were together in school, and he was an atheist. I was a Muslim at the time, and I didn't talk much about religion with this particular person. I talked about religion with everybody. I wanted people to become Muslims, and I thought Christianity and every other thing that wasn't Islam was bunk. So I was an equal opportunity faith knocker outer over when it came to Islam. But for some reason, this guy and I didn't talk much about religion while we were in school together. But I knew he was an atheist, and we just didn't talk about it. It just wasn't our relationship. Well, he had gone his way, I had gone my way, and he had come into town. And he was on a business trip, and he said, hey, why don't you find a really nice restaurant? It'll be a business expense. We'll come, we'll talk, and we'll just have a nice time. I said, if you pay, I'll pray. And he said, great, let's do it. So we have dinner at this really fancy restaurant. And, we have the usual catch-ups, how's your wife, how's your kids, how's your career going? And he asked me some questions about my journey of faith because he knew I was a Muslim and then now I became a Christian. And he wanted to know, how did it happen? What's the deal? So I gave him all the, theological and philosophical and scientific reasons I became a Christian, from Augustine to Zwingli. I mean, from A to Z, I gave him the whole thing. Well, it was a very sort of intellectual discussion, and he said, look, I have a hard time with this, though. My hard time is this. How can you tell me that this God that you claim is so good and so powerful exists? Because there's so much suffering and evil in the world. If God was powerful, he could stop the suffering. If he was good, he would want to stop the suffering, but the suffering still exists. So either he's not powerful or he's not good, or more likely, he's just not even there. That is not light dinner conversation. And so we were talking sort of academically, so I answered him a couple of times academically, and there's a few answers, actually 4 or 5 answers to this issue about the so-called problem of evil. How can God exist in a world where evil also exists? If God is good, couldn't he stop it? And there's a number of different answers, but one of the answers we settled on was basically this, is that if God exists, if a being who knows all things exists, if he knows all past things, all present things, all future things, and then a fancy term called counterfactuals, he knows all future things that could have happened, isn't it possible, I asked my friend, that he could allow, not cause, but he could allow suffering to exist in some form in someone's life for a purpose that we can't possibly see into the future, maybe 5 minutes from now or 5 millennia from now? We just don't know because we don't see what he sees. And he says, nope, not possible. And I thought that was a fast answer. No, not possible? He's like, no, it's not possible. He says, how can you tell me, this is way back now, so I'm going to date myself a little bit more. He says, how can you tell me that the tsunami that happened in 2004 in the Indian Ocean that wiped out 250,000 people and left millions more homeless, how can you tell me that God allowed that for a greater possible good? You can't possibly tell me that that's true. And I said, well, wait a minute, hold on a second. Are you telling me that you know for certain that there's no future where that suffering, though God did not cause it, was allowed to happen for a greater possible good? You're telling me you know with certainty all of the future. And he said, well, it seems like that couldn't be possible. I said, well, wait a minute. If you're saying that you know all the future, then you're using your knowledge of all the future to disprove the existence of a being who knows all the future. He said, okay, I see where you're going with this. And he said, but here's my real question. Now, by this time, the restaurant was virtually empty, and the waitresses were wondering, should we give them more coffee? But he looks up from his cold coffee, because they stopped giving us coffee, and his eyes had changed. A mist had gathered around them. And he said, here's my real issue, man. How can you tell me this God is good, or that my mother has any value when he let her die when I was a kid? You see, the philosophical rubber has met the existential road, my friends, and it's no longer a case of just offering syllogisms and philosophy into things that people in ivory towers wrestle with. Now, the answer has to matter. It has to not only be true, but also be relevant. It has to have meaning. You see, what he was looking for was not only did his mother's life have meaning, but did her death have meaning? And he had banished all belief in God ever since then. And in the decades of atheism that he had had since his mother's passing, the way he asked the question, the pathos in the question, revealed something very important. Atheism had not provided him a satisfactory answer. Because if we're honest about what this means, if there is no God, then his mother's death didn't really mean anything. It was just one event in a series of events of a bunch of different chemical machines that bump into each other, and one stopped functioning.